As a writer, should you be writing for entertainment or to make your work difficult and artistic? What mentality should you bring to your writing? And today we are going to hear Cormac McCarthy from an unreleased interview that is only available here on Right Conscious talk about these topics at length. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy, not just here on YouTube, here on the internet. In the playlist down below, I already have 170 videos on Cormac McCarthy, and in my Substack, I have 25 hours plus of podcasts on McCarthy, and both of those places, YouTube and the Substack, are growing weekly with new McCarthy content. But enough from me. Let us now hear from McCarthy. To read one of your books is work. McCarthy replies, yeah, as I said, they are not entertainment. They are not. Well, it's work to read. Son of a bitch, it's work to read. It's work to read any book. Even though it's a great pleasure and a great satisfaction to it, it's not an inert activity. You gotta, some of that city. Woodward. Does the same hold true? McCarthy replies, art is indeed a mirror. If a jackass looks in, can a philosopher look out? Does the same hold true for writing? Writing is a kind of honorable labor. Oh yeah. So you think of yourself as putting together sentences and paragraphs in the same way that a stonemason puts together a wall? McCarthy replies, I think there's some sense, yeah. I think that that's a healthy way to look at it. It's like anything else. The finished product can't be divided back into its component parts. I mean, we know that books are made out of words and words are made out of letters, but having said that, you said nothing. And I think that gets stalled is as a general principle in the world that people don't really take into account, because he then goes on to talk about how this process of writing is compared to the wiring of electrons in the brain and brain wiring. And the reason I don't have that quote is that my boy Christian, who provided me with the 5+ hours of this interview, is trying to remaster the most fuzzy audio quality and sound that you could ever imagine in this interview. And to make it worse, it's taking place in a diner where things are clanging, they're turning away from the microphone, like all this crazy shit is going on. And let me just say, 2 years ago when I started this channel, I said that I was going to create a group of Cormac McCarthy renegades. And I now know at least 10 people who have started YouTube channels on Cormac McCarthy. A bunch of other people who are writing blog posts, people who are going to start in the future. And there are people out there like Christian who are hooking me up and doing an insane service to the community by transcribing and remastering this interview that will be released at some point. We're not over here gatekeeping. It's just that he wants to release it all in full. And the audio restoration project and the transcription of it all is really a massive project. So shout out to him. Shout out to all my Cormac McCarthy renegades out there who aren't just reading the books. There's levels to the game. You read the book, doesn't really matter. That's cool. If your life is transformed by the work, that's the next level. And then if you somehow synthesize and create and share art stemming from McCarthy's work, that's the highest level, because that continues the process. So it's crazy to hear McCarthy say that his books are not entertainment, because when I look at No Country for Old Men, The Road, Child of God, they do feel like entertaining books. But then deep down, McCarthy never lets you really settle into that entertainment. Some rando is getting cannibalized. Major characters like Llewellyn Moss are getting taken out, I Want to Die in Mexico like John Grady Cole. If you guys want Cormac McCarthy streetwear and t-shirts, link is down below in the description. And McCarthy makes a point that we talk about all the time on this channel, that even if you're watching a mind-bending show or a movie, you can just sit there and let the jaw hang open, and it doesn't really require work to watch it. But when you read any book, even if it's ACOTAR by Sarah J. Maas, you are actively having to turn the pages and read and comprehend and visualize. And McCarthy tells us that art is indeed a mirror. If a jackass looks in, can a philosopher look out? And this is where so many people mess up as authors. First of all, starting too young. We're pushed with MFA programs and with competitiveness and all these other things to think that you can become a Rimbaud, a John Keats, or another author who, wrote insane work when they were 18 to 24 years old. And for 99.9% of people, even if you are a prodigy and the one who's going to one day change literature, that just is not the case. And what it's most likely going to do is give you a false sense of ego and security. And with endowments and fellowships and these things, it kind of reinforces this outward exploration. And when McCarthy hit his peak as an author, what happened? Well, in 1974, he divorced Annie Delisle and moved to Tucson, Arizona, and started getting into the occult, Freemasonry. He started spending a lot of time with himself and focusing on what he wanted to focus on. But homeboy was 41 years old. Cormac didn't start writing novels until he was 27 or 28 years old, after he was in the Air Force and spent years in college. And so for about 14 years, he had daily training with The Orchard Keeper, Out of Dark, and Child of God, spending anywhere from 6,000 to 15,000 hours on each of those books just in the revision stage. But he was being a socialite. He was being an active participant in society with a wife, going to nice restaurants. And that's something we don't hear very much about Cormac McCarthy. But a lot of the stuff that was added in the later drafts of Suttree, if you go to the archive and read them, is the mystical experience, is Suttree actually becoming a less personable character and going on this inward journey. And there are many false attempts. I'm not going to spoil anything, but this is also a theme in Blood Meridian, that the kid has these attempts to become this messianic figure with the burning bush and all these other things, but he never realizes himself. And when people look at, and The Passenger is in this category too, when you look at The Passenger, which was written around this time, Blood Meridian and Suttree, you see an author who for sure can write about nature in a beautiful way. He has the writing style and skill to be able to do that. But there is a sense of knowledge of the inner worlds of the soul that McCarthy brings to the table in those books that may be unmatched in the 20th century, at least in novels. And he did it without any interiority. He didn't have to be like Proust, going within the mind, body, and soul of someone across 6 different books to show us what that feels like, what that looks like. And so I don't really think that enough focus is put on working on yourself as a character, as a human being, learning different layers of your soul as an author. And funny enough, this is why a lot of the best 20th century and 21st century authors were not religious. Yes, when you go back throughout history, people were forced to be religious. If you were living in the 16th century or even the 19th century, there was a 99.9% chance you were going to be a Christian and not be able to transcend that, because that's what you were given. But when authors and artists finally started to have a choice, what were they able to do? Well, they were able to explore their inner world without boundaries, without all these silly limitations. And I'm not talking about moral decay or these things, but what you find inside is so bizarre that if you are going to be able to not just comprehend it, but bring that out into the world, live it, and put it into your art, you're going to have to become friends with it. And most of the time in that process, you lose your religion. And the authors that actually maintain and connect to Christianity, and I can give them credit, are ones that do explore that archetypal consciousness. Wendell Berry, Dostoevsky, Tolkien even. They're friends with that inner world. And when you hear their philosophy regarding Christianity, it's very, very open-minded. And that's something that we lost in our Puritan society. When you look at Eastern Orthodoxy or even Catholicism, there is a little bit more of a lenience when it comes to sex, when it comes to seance, when it comes to the animalistic urges and the exploration of that. And here in America, Puritanism was not just, mostly enforced, but it was combined with our secular religion here in America, which is business, which is industry. And that's why so many American artists have fallen so flat, and which is why MFA programs and endowments and fellowships have made this problem worse, is that closed-minded people who are focused on business don't really make great artists. And really, life itself is a mirror. Like what you are putting in and your inner consciousness is really what you are going to be presented with in the world. McCarthy talks about all the time that he's the luckiest person ever, that everything just fell into place. But he was also a very, very optimistic human being. Even though McCarthy was a science bro, very much into those things. When you hear him talk, when you see him writing in the archive, just his little notes, he is not this little sad boy. Even though at times he is sad and he's writing like, oh, I wish I had someone to eat Thanksgiving with. The handwriting, the energy feels overwhelmingly positive. And sometimes I read YouTube comments and there's no profile picture, and I can feel through the screen that these people are just shriveled up messes of logic who have never really been able to break free, not just into the subjective, but into the irrational, into being optimistic. Because if you're feeding yourself all this logic and all this negativity, all you're going to get out is just a bunch of shit. And the only people who are going to want to read that are the other little logic bros putting in shit, and all you guys can sit and circle jerk over it. And this is, hear McCarthy's spiritual approach, this more blue-collar attitude about putting together sentences like a stonemason puts together a wall, because McCarthy was a stonemason. And he started that practice because he heard that Robinson Jeffers and Carl Jung did that, who were also magnificent writers and thinkers. And they were somewhat into that because of Freemasonry and kind of that whole push in the early 20th century and late 19th century back to this occult revival in these reinterpretations of Hiram Abiff. In building a book, letter by letter, word by word, paragraph by paragraph, mixes logic and art or intuition together, because, you know, in a poem, I believe that it should be mostly all intuition. If you want to do some revision, that's cool. But there should be this strong intuitive impulse that you shouldn't just be logically crafting like, hey, I want to write a poem about my cat being sad. And because I'm such a good writer and can do wordplay and contrast, I can actually make it interesting. Like, that's a bunch of shit. But with novels, as I said, you do need to spend that thousands of hours in the revision stage and that building stage, which is really more of a logical game. But, you know, that's not true, because I'm sure you guys out there who have revised something before, it's actually more intuition based and more fun to revise than actually write the first draft. Because I was just doing this morning. I'm releasing a book in 2024, everybody. Super excited for it. It is a book. It's really a combination of poetry, translation, short stories, and some nonfiction stuff. So kind of a mishmash. But I sat for like an hour this morning. I woke up at 5 a.m. and from like 5:20 to about 6 a.m., I was debating what to do with 2 lines of a poem. I had like 4 different options, and it was so fun. It was almost like I was in an argument about all these different things that we could do with America. And I would rewrite them down and say them out loud, then reread the whole poem with the new additions and change something, add a comma. And eventually it got dwindled down to one thing. That was way more fun than writing the actual poem. Because by changing that little component, by figuring out like, oh, wow, this is the choke point, this area right here, I let the rest of the poem's intuition flow down as it should. But the breakthrough I had in my session this morning was when my head kind of started knocking. I was kind of like, just like writing random shit down. And I got the core of what I ended up using in one of these more intuitive moments. But when I first sat down, I was using logic. Like, oh, what should this sound like? How can I make this better? But just after enough releasing and letting go, I just let myself know and figure out what was perfect. And speaking of poetry, over on the Right Conscious Substack, I post daily poetry, which you guys can read for free. I post daily podcasts that you can listen to on Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever other podcast app, or download it as an MP3. I have a Cormac McCarthy course. As you see right here, I have a Cormac McCarthy book club and a book club that reads 10 plus other books. Right now we are reading The Passenger, Outer Dark, and Blood Meridian, among 7 other books. Plus, starting on Saturday, I'm going to start interviewing Cormac McCarthy scholars and a bunch of other cool stuff. And there'll be an occasional interview with someone way smarter than me, only available over on the Right Conscious Substack. And if you guys can't afford to subscribe, like I said, I have some free Cormac McCarthy blog posts. I probably have 10,000 words of essays on Cormac McCarthy over there. And if you guys don't care about that, I have a free PDF also in the description down below with everything else that details Cormac McCarthy's 144, of Cormac McCarthy's favorite books and authors. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for the support. And I'm excited to do more Cormac McCarthy content because I have a bunch of slideshows from other interviews I've done on Cormac McCarthy topics related to Blood Meridian and The Passenger that I've just kind of been lazy about not giving to you guys. And so hopefully I can get that out soon, and I'll see you guys there.